and I didn't like it. I know, BookTube is quaking. Trying to keep it fresh for you, I would like to talk to you about my April wrap-up.
I'm not a rapper.
I have never done a wrap-up before that I posted because I did film some and then the months changed. Sometimes you don't know what month it is anymore. I am using my trusty bullet journal and I am going through the books that I read. I read 13 books in April. First book that I read was The End of the Ocean by Mahalunde or Majalunde, I'm not sure. Honestly, I almost fell asleep a lot. It follows this woman who lives quite some time ago and is somewhat involved in boycotting this kind of construction that's going to take place in this area of natural resource, and she is fighting to stop tearing down this land. And at the meantime, we are also hearing a story that is in the distant future, taking place with the two protagonists there, which is a father and his daughter. And at this point in time, water is not just a very rare resource. Pretty much nobody has it at all. If you had it, everyone would be shocked. So they are refugees that are fleeing while they wait to reunite with the wife of the guy, the mother of the daughter. And of course, the guy, slight spoilers, the guy hooks up with some random girl that's in the refugee camp, and his daughter is there because, of course, so many books do this, and it's honestly sickening. Why do you always do this? This book was a 2-star read for me. I didn't really love it. I thought it was going to be more interesting. I was just tired of this book after a while. I thought this was going to be more of a cry for help about climate change, and actually it was just a cry for me to go to sleep. The next book was Weather by Jenny Awful, and this book was awful. This was a 1-star for me. I didn't like this book at all. This was just a series of non sequiturs over and over and over again from different people's perspectives or their thoughts, and just before they were about to form a coherent thought, then it would switch off and somebody else would start talking, and that was really annoying because you never got any sort of story out of that. Instead, it was just talking and then stopping, and then someone else talking and then someone else stopping, and they were so disjointed. There was never a theme or any kind of plot that I could to speak of. I couldn't find anything that made sense together. This was like if Jenny Awful took like 12 different puzzles and just pulled the pieces out and started putting a picture together, and there's no coherency. It doesn't make an overall picture that's like that mosaic where you zoom in and there's like cool little pictures or anything. No, it's just a mess. It's just a mess. Maybe I missed something, but like I kept rewinding my audiobook because I was sure that I missed a chapter or there's something wrong with it, because it would just turn into some other totally separate conversation. And this was also supposed to be something about climate change, and it really just wasn't for me impactful or anything at all for me. So I didn't like this. The book ended really abruptly and I just didn't like it. Next up was the ABC Murders. I gave this 3 stars. This is by Agatha Christie. And it was pretty good. At the ending, I was not quite sure where it was going, and then they did a little like, ooh thing, and I liked that, and I'm glad it happened. But I've also realized at this point in my life that when I read an Agatha Christie book, I'm not trying to be smart. As far as I know, people do not read Agatha Christie books going like, I totally guess what's going to happen and exactly how they did it and everything like that, and I'll just wait for you to also say it, but I knew it. The I knew it is just like, I feel like maybe it's the butler. I feel like maybe it's the husband. Like that kind of stuff, which is a gut feeling, but I have no evidence. I have no reason why they would do this. I don't know what the motive is. I don't know how they did it. I don't know any of that stuff. So I basically just sit there and wait patiently until Hercule Poirot at the end just tells me what's up after like 6 hours of me just waiting. And then Hercule Poirot is like, oh, mon ami, of course, it is this person. And I'm like, duh, thank you. Queen. A lot of Agatha Christie books do not get higher than 3 stars for me because I'm just confused a lot, and if I get really confused, I get really sleepy because I don't know what's going on, and there's a bee nearby, and I don't like that. Okay, the next book was Waking Gods, and this one I actually have in person, and it wasn't an audiobook for once. This is my book, and I love it very much. So this is the second book in the Themis Files series. The first book, Sleeping Giants, is one of my absolute favorite books in the whole world. I love it dearly with all my heart, and I've been putting off reading this because I was scared that it would ruin the series for me, kind of. That, you know, you're just so attached to these characters in the first book, and then you get the second one, and you're just worried that, you know, what if things change, and what if it's different, and, you know, I guess it's sort of having to let go of some events in the first book and just see how they evolve in the second. Some things happened that I didn't like. Slight spoilers here. I was on the phone with my boyfriend. We were buddy reading this, and we were gushing over these characters, going like, I love this character, they're such a strong lead, and I think they're so great as a role model, and I would love to see what they do with this person, and yeah, I love this other character too, and they're so cool, and I can't wait to see what their origin story is and hear so much more about them. And I was like, yeah, this is so great. I love them so much. And then we hung up, and then I literally flipped to the next page, and then they both died. So what the fuck? One of those was my favorite character, and I wasn't happy. And the other one was a really, really close second favorite character. And I also wasn't happy, especially because I felt like it was done just to further the plot, and there was really no reason for them to die. And also, this did introduce a character that I was initially okay with, but by the end, I was like, you're kind of super annoying. And, I think that this person was written to be really annoying on purpose, and also it kind of makes sense with their backstory, but, it took a lot of enjoyment out of this book for me. At the same time, I really, really love the ethics of what goes on in this story, and without giving too much away, there's a lot of the same general ideas as what you see in the first one, as far as what should we do on a global scale if we make this great scientific discovery? What should we be allowed to do in terms of how this will affect the whole world? But even beyond that, how this affects us as a species? What makes us human? What makes us who we really are? It sounds very corny and gushy, but the way that this is done is very scientific and very, very enthralling, and I really liked it. So this was still a 4-star for me, even though that other stuff happened. I would definitely recommend that you pick up the first book and check this out. The 5th book that I read for April was Dead Fathers Club by Matt Haig. So I read some of Reasons to Stay Alive, and then it was due at the library and I had to give it back, but I really liked it, so I wanted to check out more of Matt Haig's books. I didn't really like this at the beginning. Actually, for 3/4 of it, I really didn't like it. It was a lot of dialogue back and forth that didn't need to happen. And by this I mean, he said, "Do you want a soda?" She said, "Yes, I would like a soda." And he said, "But what kind of soda?" She said, "Well, I don't really know what kind of sodas there are." He said, "Well, we have Coke. Well, we have Sprite. Well, we have root beer."
And she said, "I do suppose I do enjoy a root beer." And he said, "Okay, I will get you a root beer." And then she said, "Thank you for the root beer." And he said, "No problem for the root beer."
Like, they would just talk back and forth, and he said, and she said, and he said, and she said, until you're just like, can you just get to the point? You know you don't have to write that. You could just put quotation marks. But this was obviously the style of writing that Matt Haig was going for, and it was a lot of, like, proper British, like, Victorian England vibes I was getting, but I think the execution was a bit lacking there, and a lot of stuff happened. Yet another case of a child knowing that their parent is having sex with somebody else, and it was weird. But actually by the end, I think I was won over. I don't necessarily think I would revisit or necessarily highly recommend this book, but this is a retelling of Hamlet, and by the end, I think this really kind of, you know, it shook me around a little bit, and I didn't really see that coming, and I think this was actually a very good telling of grief and coping, and sort of the different ways that's interpreted by this ending leaves some room for you to think about what you think it's supposed to mean. I think there's a lot of questioning that I had done by the end, by the time I put the book down. It was an audiobook, but by the time I finished the book, I was still definitely thinking about what really happened, because it is a bit open-ended, and I actually really liked that. The next book that I read was Snow Glass Apples, which is by, it's a story by Neil Gaiman, and I gave this book 4 stars because it was very good. This is a graphic novel that basically takes the story of Snow White, but it takes it from the Queen's perspective, and we've seen retellings, we know, but what was really cool that I've just never even thought about before was they took Snow White, and instead of just taking the exact same storyline and tweaking it a little bit, they were like, hey, Snow White is a freaking, like, demon vampire lady, and she's crazy. So the Queen is just trying to, like, keep herself safe from Snow White, which actually kind of makes sense with the whole carving up the heart thing from the original story and stuff. And I wouldn't say that the story was necessarily perfect, but it definitely was one of those creepy things that sticks in your brain for a little while. And it was so creepy, but it was so cool. And the art was gorgeous. It was so pretty. I was staring at it for so much longer than I actually needed to actually read the graphic novel. Hoopla is now doing some free borrows during this time of uncertainty. So they're letting you borrow some books for free in terms of, it doesn't count against your monthly borrows. So for me, my library only lets me take out 4, but now I can take out a lot more because of those free borrows. I would check that one out if that one is available to you too. The next book I read was Rogue Protocol, which is the 3rd book in the Murderbot series by Martha Wells. Honestly, a lot of people really love the Murderbot series, and I think it's just okay. Like, I read the first book and I was like, and then I read the second book and I was like, and this 3rd book I was like, I didn't love it. I honestly just turned this on so I had something to listen to while I was reorganizing my bookshelves, and I didn't retain a lot of information because it just didn't grab me. Like, I think some people died, and I don't remember much of anything else. And I rewinded it and listened again, but honestly, I just don't really remember. But it is a really short read. I gave this book 2 stars, and it just sort of didn't do it for me. The next book that I read was The Authenticity Project by Claire Pooley, and oh boy, if this book ended 3 hours into this audiobook with like just a little wrap up to conclude it, I would be really happy with this book. I think I might have given it, 3.5, maybe 4 stars, because there was a really good job of starting to build up these characters and make them really interesting and engaging. And I actually cared about their backgrounds, their stories, and what kind of journeys they were starting to go on. But this shit got really dumb, and it turned into a chick lit book that just had all these same old cookie cutter romance plots that I don't like, and that's just sort of not my thing. I don't really like any of those sort of romance books. I don't like reading about other people's romances very often unless they're very natural, and I think that a lot of these are not ever written realistically. There was this scene where this woman at the end is confronting her husband because he doesn't really pay attention to her and he's always at work, and he just like puts a dish in the sink and she's like, what's wrong with putting stuff in the dishwasher? And he's like, why are you getting so mad about the dishwasher? And it's like, it's not about the dishwasher. And it's like, of course it's not about the dishwasher. And he's like, well, we're clearly both unhappy. And they start having this heart to heart, and he just is like, yeah, we're both unhappy, but I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And then he just walks away into his office. And I don't know if I just blacked out at this point because that was so dumb that he did this. But then, like, the rest of the book, which was just the conclusion of the book, had like 30 more minutes. And I didn't hear anything else about those 2 characters fighting or the resolution. Maybe I just missed it. But how do you just end a book? Like, don't address that at all? I don't know. I have a lot of thoughts on this. I think I will be posting a more full review at some point, but this book was 2 stars for me, and it is barely 2 stars for me. You really, what's that word? You cinched it? You clinched it? You messed with it? You really dookied it on this one. Okay, Claire Pooley, you dookied it, and I didn't like it. I think the next one I read was The Double Clue, which is another Agatha Christie. This one was really short, and I think this one was like 20 minutes, 30 minutes or something like that. It was fine. It wasn't amazing or anything like that. So I gave it 2 stars. 2 stars for me is not like it's really bad. It's like it's fine. I'm not really going to recommend it necessarily, but it's fine. The next book that I read was Vox Machina. This is a graphic novel, the first volume graphic novel of the Critical Role podcast. for their campaign. I've never listened to Critical Role, but I do have a lot of friends in my D&D group who love Critical Role, and now I think I'm the only person in there who hasn't actually listened to their podcast. But I thought that maybe if I didn't listen to the podcast, that going into this I might just have no idea what's going on, and I was afraid this was going to be one of those things that only got published because the podcast is so popular. But it actually told more of a story. I don't think it was necessarily so unique in terms of a D&D campaign that it blew me out of the water or anything like that. I think I rated this 4 stars just because it gave me a lot of entertainment value. The art was good, and I'm actually really interested to dive into the podcast soon. So, 4 stars. So I also read The Witch of Dooba, and The Witch of Dooba is a book by Leigh Bardugo. This is a really short 1-hour audiobook that I found on Audible Stories, which is free, and you can listen to it right now. And this was a retelling of Hansel and Gretel, but like if Hansel just wasn't there. It was really good, and it's not because Hansel wasn't there, but it was really good. This has kind of that classic, you know, like the stepmother's evil, and there's like a witch in the woods kind of thing. So that wasn't necessarily a surprise to me with this whole setup of stuff. The witch was really chill, and I liked that. And also the ending just sort of like flipped everything on its head, and I just didn't see it coming, and it was really cool. So I gave this one 4 stars because this really pleasantly surprised me. I really liked it, and now I want to read more of Leigh Bardugo stuff. The next book that I read was The Bear and the Nightingale, and this I was buddy reading with Lou and Life, and I didn't like it. I know, BookTube is quaking. This is like BookTube's baby. This is BookTube, sweetheart. I didn't like it. Catherine Arden, come for me. I'm sorry, but it's beautiful cover. I'm not sorry. You know what? I'm not sorry. I didn't like this book. I didn't like it. It was boring. I felt like nothing happened. This was like a 13-hour audiobook, and I honestly feel like this could have been condensed into maybe 4 hours and been fine. This was very repetitive, and it just kind of kept repeating stuff over and over again to the point where you're just mind-numbingly like, I don't even understand what's going on anymore. So Bear and the Nightingale follows this young girl named... What an impact this book had on me. I don't even remember the protagonist's name. This follows a young girl who is basically a witch, and she is in like old-timey Russia, and her family consists of a whole bunch of brothers and sisters and her father, because her mother died in childbirth, and when she was pregnant with her, she knew that she would be a witch and said, I want to have this baby even though I know I won't survive the pregnancy. So this child, whose name I don't remember, was born, and as she grows up, everyone's like, she's so ugly, and then she gets older and they're like, she's ugly, but a lot of sexualizing kids' bodies, which I don't like, because I think she was like maybe 12 to 15, somewhere in that range, and they're like, what long arms, she's ugly, but I'd let her be mine. Like, it follows her as she makes friends with all of these creatures that are kind of like the spirits that guard these different places in the village, and if they are not receiving their offerings, then they sort of wouldn't protect those places. And this priest moves into town, and he's like, well, I know, let's convert everyone to Christianity, so that way they stop giving offerings to these spirits. And the stepmother hates the girl, so she's like, yeah, and they do that. I didn't understand why the whole BookTube community seems to love this book. I liked the beginning. I liked that there are these grim fairy tale kind of aspects to the story, but generally it was just honestly boring, and I didn't really care about any of the characters, and then some stuff happens to some of the characters, and I was literally like, I literally don't care. When it comes out, I will also link Lou's review of The Bear and the Nightingale down below. Although we did not have the same star rating, we had very similar opinions of this book. I'm not sorry. The last book that I read in April was Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer, and this is a book I have already read, and I really loved it. I read it back in October, and I just really had this urge to reread it, and I really wanted to do that because I'm doing another buddy read with a friend who is not on BookTube, but we decided we were going to read the entire Southern Reach trilogy together. So I needed to go back and just kind of refresh myself on all those details there, and I really, really, really liked revisiting it and catching little glimpses of some stuff that I might have forgotten or just missed my first run through because I was just so excited about reading it. I remember actually reading this the first time and just immediately giving it 5 stars because it was so highly anticipated for me, and it lived up to that hype in my heart, and I just loved it so much. Annihilation follows this group of explorers that are on the 12th expedition into Area X, which is this unknown land, and they have been preceded by these other expeditions that have gone there, but everybody who returns from the expedition comes back changed, or just like they kill themselves on the way back. So it's very treacherous in Area X, and they need to prepare. So they bring along an anthropologist, a psychologist, a surveyor, a biologist, and the linguist. I think those are all 5. And they are supposed to work together to get through this area and just kind of map it out and explore anything else that they can and bring their information back. But some stuff happens while they're in Area X, and pretty shortly after just getting there, you know, some weird stuff's definitely going on. People start disappearing, and your main protagonist, the biologist, is just trying to figure out what's going on and not really abandon this expedition because she feels ties to Area X and wants to know what's going on here, especially because her husband was on the last expedition that just went in there, and she wants to find out what happened to him because when he came back from the expedition, he was not the same. I'm really hoping that the second book, Authority, does not disappoint me because I have heard it's really, really different from Annihilation, and the third book is Acceptance. I have both of those sitting on my little bookshelf, so I really want to get into those as soon as I can. So these are all of the books that I read in April. I would love to know what you read in April and what you're going to put on your May TBR. For me, that video is going to come pretty soon because I have a lot of readathons coming up. Thank you so much for joining me. Please, please subscribe if you're interested in seeing more content like this or totally different shit because I am not consistent. See you later.